The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was the largest structure ever built by living beings. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed inside it. Light from 1,000 floating crystals made the walls shine like liquid gold. 12 species sat in their designated sections, each one believing themselves to be the most important voice in the galaxy. The humans sat at the very back, in the smallest section, with the worst view of the central platform. Ambassador Jake Carter adjusted his simple gray suit and waited. He had given this same speech 14 times over the past 50 years. His father had given it before him, his grandfather before that. For 300 years, humanity had asked the same question. And for 300 years, they had received the same answer. Today would be different. Jake knew it in his bones. But not in the way the council expected. The High Speaker, a Valari named Torum, rose from his elevated seat. His skin shifted colors as he moved, displaying patterns that his species used to show emotion. Right now, the patterns showed boredom and mild irritation. He had more important matters to discuss today. The human petition was simply an annoying tradition that needed to be dismissed so they could move on. The Assembly will now hear the human petition for full voting rights, Torum announced. His voice echoed through the massive chamber. Ambassador Carter, you may speak. Jake stood slowly. He looked around the room at the faces of beings who had never once seen him as an equal. The Valari, with their color-changing skin and their ancient pride. The Mithrani, with their insect-like bodies and their warrior culture. The Korathi, with their 4 arms and their brilliant scientific minds. All of them looking at him with the same expression they always wore when humans spoke. Tolerance, patience. The kind of look an adult gives to a child who keeps asking the same question. Thank you, High Speaker, Jake said. His voice was calm and steady. He had practiced being calm for a very long time. I will keep this brief. I will keep this brief. He pulled out a small device and projected images into the air above the central platform. Star maps, supply routes, defense networks, medical stations, agricultural programs, educational centers. 300 years ago, humanity joined this council as a provisional member. We were young. We were eager. We wanted to prove ourselves worthy of standing beside the great civilizations of the galaxy. Jake moved through the images slowly. We were given the jobs no one else wanted. We maintained the shipping lanes. We ran the supply depots. We staffed the medical stations on the frontier worlds. We taught children. We grew food. We fixed machines. We did these things without complaint, because we believed that one day, our service would earn us respect. He paused and looked directly at High Speaker Torum. In those 300 years, human engineers have built or repaired 60% of the infrastructure this council depends on. Human doctors have treated over 2 billion patients across all 12 species. Human soldiers have died defending borders that are not our own. Human scientists have contributed to 412 major discoveries that have benefited every species in this room. The images changed to show a simple chart. Numbers, statistics, the cold, hard truth of what humanity had given. And in those 300 years, Jake continued, humanity has requested full voting rights 14 times. We have been denied 14 times. The reasons given have changed over the centuries. We were too young, too emotional, too primitive, too aggressive, too peaceful, too ambitious, not ambitious enough. He turned off the projection. The hall fell silent. Today, I am not here to beg. I am not here to argue. I am simply here to ask, one final time, if this council believes that humanity has earned the right to be treated as equals. High Speaker Torum's skin flickered with colors that Jake had learned to read over the years. Annoyance. Dismissal. A hint of amusement that the humans were still trying. The council thanks the human ambassador for his words, Torum said. We will now vote. The vote took less than a minute. 11 species voted no. Humanity voted yes. The result was the same as it had always been. The petition is denied, Torum announced. The humans have not yet demonstrated sufficient evolutionary advancement to warrant full membership. Perhaps in another century, they will be ready. Some of the delegates laughed softly. It was an old joke. The humans were always almost ready. Almost worthy. Almost equal. Jake looked up at the observation gallery where Admiral Maya Brooks sat with Chief Engineer David Park. They had been watching in silence. Now, they both gave him a small nod. The signal they had agreed upon. It was time. The human delegation thanks the Council for its consideration, Jake said. His voice did not waver. His face showed no anger, no sadness, no frustration. Just a calm, quiet acceptance that had taken him decades to master. We withdraw our petition. He gathered his materials and placed them neatly in his bag. We withdraw our personnel from all Council stations and operations. The delegates barely noticed his words. They were already talking among themselves, moving on to the next item on the agenda. We withdraw our medical teams, our engineering corps, our military advisors, our agricultural specialists, our teachers, our scientists. Still, no one paid attention. The humans were always saying dramatic things. It meant nothing. We withdraw from this council, effective immediately. Jake walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the vast hall. Not a single delegate watched him go. They had already forgotten about the human petition. There were trade agreements to discuss, territory disputes to settle, important matters that required the attention of important species. By the time the session ended 3 hours later, the human section of the assembly hall was empty. The chairs had been removed. The flags had been taken down. The small plaque that read "Human Delegation" had been carefully unscrewed from the wall and packed away. That night, across the galaxy, humans quietly left their posts. They packed their belongings. They said goodbye to colleagues who barely acknowledged them. They boarded ships that had been secretly prepared for this moment over many years. Admiral Maya Brooks oversaw the evacuation from her command ship. Thousands of vessels moved in perfect coordination, following routes that had been planned in secret, heading toward destinations that no other species knew about. Chief Engineer David Park was the last human to leave the central power station that supplied energy to the Council's capital world. He had spent 30 years keeping that ancient system running. He knew every wire, every circuit, every failing component that he had held together with creativity and stubbornness. He left detailed instructions for whoever would take over. He knew no one would read them. By morning, there was not a single human left in Council space. No announcements had been made, no demands had been issued, no ultimatums had been delivered. The humans had simply done what they always did. They had followed instructions. They had completed their tasks. They had cleaned up after themselves. And then they had vanished. The Council would not notice for 3 months. They had never really noticed the humans before. Why would they start now? But they would learn. In time, they would all learn exactly what they had lost. The first sign of trouble came from the Outer Rim trade routes. Captain Voris of the Valari merchant fleet had traveled the same path between the mining colonies and the central markets for 20 years. He knew every star, every asteroid field, every navigation beacon along the way. The journey was routine, safe, boring, until his ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the middle of empty space, far from any known system. "What happened?" he demanded, his skin flashing red with alarm. His navigator stared at the instruments with confusion. "The beacon at Junction Point 7 is gone, Captain. Not damaged. Not malfunctioning. Gone. Our navigation system had no reference point. So it pulled us out of the travel lane." Voris contacted the trade authority to report the problem. They told him to wait. A repair team would be sent. Someone would fix it. 3 days later, no one had come. Voris used emergency fuel to limp to the nearest station, arriving with barely enough power to dock. He was not the only one. 14 Valari cargo ships vanished that week. Some emerged in random locations, confused and low on fuel. Others were never seen again, lost somewhere in the vast darkness between stars. The Trade Authority launched an investigation. They discovered that the navigation beacons along the Outer Rim had been maintained by a single human team led by a woman named Emily Stone. She had run the operation for 15 years with a small crew and a tiny budget. No one had ever paid attention to her work. The beacons simply worked, and that was all anyone cared about. Now Emily Stone was gone. Her entire team was gone. The beacons were failing one by one, and no one knew how to fix them. High Speaker Torum received the report with irritation. "Find other technicians," he ordered. How difficult can it be to maintain a few signal devices? Very difficult, it turned out. The beacon system was old, built with technology that had been outdated for centuries. Emily Stone had kept it running through constant repairs and clever modifications that she had never fully documented. Other engineers looked at the system and shook their heads. They would need years to understand it. They would need even longer to fix it. The Outer Rim trade routes remained closed. While the Volari worried about their shipping lanes, the Korathi faced a different problem. Dr. Marcus Lee had run the Disease Research Center on Station 12 for 25 years. He had studied the Korath Plague, a terrible sickness that had nearly destroyed the Korathi species centuries ago. The plague still existed in small pockets on the frontier worlds, contained by careful monitoring and quick response teams. Marcus had developed the protocols that kept the plague from spreading. He had trained the response teams. He had created the early warning system that detected outbreaks before they could grow. When he left with the other humans, he sent a complete copy of all his research to the Korathi government. Every protocol, every treatment, every warning sign to watch for. He wanted to make sure they could continue his work. The Korathi officials received the files and placed them in an archive. They did not read them. They did not assign anyone to take over the monitoring program. The plague had been under control for so long that they assumed it would stay that way forever. 60 days after the humans left, the first outbreak began on a small colony world. Local doctors reported the symptoms, but no one was watching the early warning system. By the time the Korathi government realized what was happening, the plague had spread to 3 other worlds. Thousands died in the first month. The Korathi scrambled to find Marcus Lee's research in their archives. When they finally located it, they discovered that following his protocols required specialized training that none of their doctors had received. The plague continued to spread. On the other side of the galaxy, the Mithrani were facing their own disaster. The Mithrani were warriors. They had built their entire civilization around strength, honor, and combat. They looked down on other species who could not fight. They especially looked down on humans, whose soft bodies and short lives seemed weak and pathetic. But even the mighty Mithrani had enemies they could not defeat alone. The Dread Swarm was a force of nature more than an army. Billions of creatures that moved through space like a living wave, consuming everything in their path. They had no diplomacy, no fear, no mercy. They simply ate and multiplied and moved on to the next target. For 20 years, the Mithrani border had held against the swarm. Military analysts from other species were amazed. The Mithrani were powerful warriors, but the swarm had numbers beyond counting. How did they keep winning? The answer was a human named Alex Rivera. Alex had been assigned to the Mithrani as a military advisor when he was young. The Mithrani generals had laughed at him. What could a human teach them about war? But Alex was patient. He watched. He learned, and slowly, he began to offer suggestions. He showed them how to predict the swarm's movements. He designed defensive positions that channeled the enemy into kill zones. He created supply systems that kept the front lines equipped and reinforced. He turned the Mithrani's individual bravery into coordinated strategy. The Mithrani generals took credit for every victory. They never mentioned Alex in their reports. They told their people that Mithrani's strength alone was holding the line. When Alex left with the other humans, he took his knowledge with him. He left behind notes and recommendations. But the Mithrani generals ignored them. They did not need human advice. They had won every battle for 20 years. Within 3 months, the Dread Swarm had pushed deeper into Mithrani territory than ever before. The generals tried the same tactics that had always worked, but without Alex's coordination, the battles became chaos. Warriors died by the thousands. Colony worlds fell. The swarm kept coming. High Speaker Torum called an emergency session of the council. For the first time in centuries, every species was facing a crisis at the same time. Trade routes were closed. Plague was spreading. Borders were falling. "Where are the humans?" Torum demanded. His skin was pale, the colors weak and sickly. He had not slept in days. "Send for them. Order them to return to their posts." But there was no one to send for. The humans had not rebelled. They had not declared war. They had not made demands or issued threats. They had simply asked to be treated as equals, been told no, and left. The council had no power over them, no leverage, no way to force them back. "We will find them," Torum declared. "We will make them return." He sent ships to Earth, to the human colonies, to every system where humans had once lived. They found empty cities, abandoned stations, hollow shells of settlements that had been carefully, methodically evacuated. The humans had been planning this for years, perhaps decades. Every supply line, every trade route, every escape path had been prepared in advance. They had known this day would come, and they had been ready. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was beginning to understand just how much it had depended on the species it had treated as servants. The first cracks had appeared. Soon, the whole structure would begin to fall. 1 year after the humans left, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Rachel Kim had been a diplomat. Not a famous one. Not a powerful one. Just a patient woman who spent 30 years sitting in small rooms, listening to people shout at each other, and somehow finding ways to make them stop. Her specialty was the conflict between the Valari and the Torvak. These two species had hated each other for thousands of years. Their ancestors had fought wars that killed billions. Their border was a line drawn in blood and fire, and both sides believed that the other had started it. Rachel had not solved this ancient hatred. No one could do that. But she had managed something almost as important. She had kept it contained. Every time a Valari ship crossed into Torvak space, Rachel was there to calm the situation. Every time a Torvak general made threatening speeches, Rachel found a way to reassure the Valari that war was not coming. She spent her life putting out small fires before they could become big ones. When she left, no one replaced her. The Valari and Torvak governments each assumed the other would behave. They had been at peace for decades. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. A minor incident at the border escalated into a shooting. The shooting became a battle. The battle became a war. Within 6 months, the two species were locked in the bloodiest conflict either had seen in generations. Thousands died in the first month, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Cities burned. Fleets clashed in the darkness between stars. Ancient hatreds that Rachel had spent her life suppressing erupted with terrible fury. The council tried to intervene. They sent their own diplomats, their own peacekeepers, their own mediators. None of them had Rachel's patience. None of them had her knowledge of both cultures. None of them had spent 30 years building the relationships and trust that made peace possible. The war continued. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Thomas Wright was remembered for the first time in his 35 years of service. Thomas had been responsible for the central power grid, the massive network that supplied energy to the Council's capital world and dozens of surrounding systems. The grid was ancient, built centuries ago with technology that no one fully understood anymore. It should have been replaced decades ago, but the Council had always found reasons to delay. The budget was needed elsewhere. The system still worked. Why fix what was not broken? Thomas knew why. He knew that the grid was held together with temporary repairs and desperate creativity. He knew that every year brought new failures, new breakdowns, new emergencies that he somehow managed to solve with limited resources and no support. He had requested upgrades hundreds of times. He had written reports warning of catastrophic failure. He had begged for funding, for equipment, for additional staff. The Council had ignored every request. The lights stayed on. That was all that mattered. When Thomas left, he wrote a complete manual for maintaining the grid. He documented every modification he had made, every weak point he was monitoring, every system that needed immediate attention. He sent copies to every relevant department. No one read them. 3 months after his departure, the first major blackout hit the capital world. Power failed across entire continents. Hospitals lost electricity. Transportation systems stopped. Millions of people were trapped in darkness, confused and afraid. Engineers rushed to fix the problem, but they could not understand Thomas's modifications. The systems he had built were brilliant, but complex. Designed by a man who had been forced to work with inadequate tools and impossible deadlines. Without him to explain, the repairs took weeks instead of hours. The blackouts continued. Some lasted days. The great capital of the Galactic Council, jewel of civilization, beacon of progress, went dark again and again, while engineers struggled to understand technology that one human had maintained single-handedly for 35 years. But the worst discovery was still to come. Grace Park had worked in a small office on an unremarkable station far from the center of power. Her title was Cosmic Threat Analyst. Her job was to watch the sky for dangers. Asteroids, solar flares, radiation storms. The universe was full of things that could destroy a world without warning. Grace had saved the Korathi homeworld twice. The first time, she detected an asteroid that would have struck their largest city and had it diverted with 3 days to spare. The second time, she predicted a solar flare that would have killed millions and warned them in time to activate their planetary shields. The Korathi never knew her name. They never knew that a human woman in a distant office had saved their civilization twice over. When they celebrated their good fortune, they thanked their own gods, their own leaders, their own luck. When Grace left, her early warning network went silent. No one was assigned to replace her. No one even knew exactly what she had been doing. 7 months after her departure, an asteroid entered Korathi space. It was detected too late. Emergency responses were too slow. The rock struck a colony world with the force of 1,000 nuclear weapons. 300,000 people died in an instant. The Korathi government launched an investigation. They discovered Grace Park's work for the first time. They found her logs, her reports, her warnings that she had sent faithfully every month to officials who had never bothered to read them. They found records of the 2 times she had saved their homeworld. Times they had never known about. Dangers they had never realized they faced. And they found her resignation letter, sent quietly on the day the humans withdrew. It was simple and professional. It thanked the Korathi for the opportunity to serve. It wished them well in the future. It expressed hope that someone would continue the important work of watching the sky. No one had. High Speaker Torum stood before what remained of the council. Half the seats were empty now. The Mithrani were consumed by their war against the swarm. The Korathi were struggling against plague and disaster. The Valari and Torvak were destroying each other. "We must find the humans," Torum said again. His voice was weak, his skin dull. He had aged decades in the past year. "We must bring them back." "How?" asked Councillor Yira of the Torvak. "We have searched everywhere. They are gone. They do not want to be found. Then we will make them come back. We will find their new homes and demand their return." "Demand?" Yira's voice was bitter. "We demanded their service for 300 years. We demanded their loyalty. We demanded their sacrifice. And in return, we gave them nothing. Not even respect. Why would they listen to our demands now?" No one had an answer. In the darkness of space, far from Council territory, the humans watched and waited. They had built new homes on worlds no other species knew about. They had created new lives, free from the endless, thankless service that had defined their existence for centuries. They did not celebrate the Council's suffering. They took no joy in watching their former masters struggle. They simply lived, for the first time in 300 years, as free people. And they wondered if the Council would ever understand what it had lost. The assembly hall was quiet now. Not the respectful silence of formal proceedings, but the heavy stillness of exhaustion and despair. High Speaker Torum sat in his elevated seat and looked down at the empty sections. The Mithrani had not attended in 6 months. Their border had collapsed. The dread swarm was consuming their worlds one by one. The Korathi seats were empty because their delegation was quarantined, trapped on their homeworld as the plague spread despite every effort to stop it. The Valari and Torvak sections held only skeleton crews. The rest of their representatives called home to fight in the endless war. 5 years had passed since the humans left. The galaxy had become unrecognizable. Admiral Kevin Bell stood before the council. He was a Valari military commander, but he had chosen a human name decades ago. He had served alongside humans in the frontier defense forces. He had watched them work and fight and die for causes that were not their own. He had been one of the few aliens who called them friends. "High Speaker," Kevin said, his skin showing colors of deep sorrow. "I must deliver my report on the search for the human population." Torim nodded wearily. He no longer had the energy for formal speeches and ceremonial words. "We have found nothing," Kevin continued. "Our scouts have searched thousands of systems. We have followed every rumor, investigated every signal, chased every possibility. The humans are gone. They have hidden themselves somewhere beyond our reach, and they have no intention of being found." "They cannot hide forever," Torim said. "The galaxy is vast, but it is not infinite. With respect, High Speaker, I do not think they are hiding because they fear us. I think they are hiding because they have no reason to return." The words hung in the air. Torim's skin flickered with anger, but the color was weak, faded. "They were part of this council," he said. "They had duties, responsibilities. They cannot simply abandon their obligations." Kevin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. "What obligations? We never gave them any rights. We never allowed them to vote on the laws they had to follow. We never let them own property in council territory. We never permitted them to hold any rank higher than advisor. For 300 years, we treated them as servants and called it partnership. They were not ready for more responsibility. They were too young, too emotional, too young." Kevin shook his head. "Their species is older than mine." "Too emotional?" "I watched human doctors work for days without sleep to save Karathi children during the first plague outbreak. I watched human engineers freeze to death repairing life support systems on stations where the residents would not even acknowledge their names. I watched human soldiers stand between Mithrani warriors and certain death, buying time for evacuation ships that left them behind." He stepped closer to the High Speaker's platform. "They were emotional, yes. They cried when their friends died. They celebrated when they succeeded. They laughed and loved and grieved like any living beings. We called that a weakness. But their emotions did not stop them from serving. Their emotions did not stop them from giving everything they had to species who gave nothing in return." Torim said nothing. His colors had faded to a dull gray. Counselor Yira rose from the Torvac section. Her voice was tired, but there was something new in it. Something that sounded almost like shame. "I have been reviewing the records," she said. "The full records. The ones that were classified or ignored or simply forgotten over the centuries." She activated a display screen. Numbers appeared. Statistics. Data. In 300 years of service, humans donated more than 4 trillion labor hours to council operations. They staffed 93% of frontier medical stations. They maintained 62% of all critical infrastructure. They provided 78% of emergency response personnel. She changed the display. More numbers. In return, humans received the lowest wages of any species in council space. They were denied housing rights on 70% of council worlds. They were prohibited from owning businesses, holding political office, or serving in command positions. They paid taxes at the highest rate while receiving services at the lowest rate. She turned to face the remaining delegates. "We did not treat them as partners. We did not even treat them as workers. We treated them as tools, resources to be used and discarded. And when they asked, politely, respectfully, 14 times over 3 centuries, to be treated as equals, we laughed at them." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. A young Korathi delegate spoke up. He was new to the council, appointed after his predecessor died in the plague. He had grown up hearing stories about human doctors who had saved his grandfather's life. "I reviewed Dr. Marcus Lee's files," he said quietly. "The ones he sent to our government when he left. He did not have to do that. He could have taken his knowledge and let the plague destroy us. Instead, he gave us everything he knew. Every treatment, every protocol, every warning sign." He paused. struggling with the next words. In his final message, he said he hoped we would be well. He said he held no anger toward our people. He said that healing was what humans did, and he could not stop doing it just because his patients had never thanked him. He looked down at his hands. We ignored his files for 2 months. We were too proud to read human research. By the time we finally looked, the plague had spread to 7 worlds. The truth was finally being spoken. The ugly, shameful truth that the Council had buried for 3 centuries. They had taken everything humanity had to offer. Every skill. Every sacrifice. Every act of kindness, and courage, and dedication. They had taken it all, and given nothing back but contempt. And humanity had stayed anyway, year after year, generation after generation. They had stayed because they believed that someday, things would change. Someday, their service would be recognized. Someday, they would be accepted as equals. That hope had sustained them for 300 years, and then, it had died. They did not leave because they hated us, Counselor Yura said softly. They left because they finally stopped hoping we would change. High Speaker Torum sat in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. What do we do now? No one had an answer. The humans were gone. The galaxy was falling apart. And for the first time in their long history, the great species of the Council had to face a simple, devastating truth. They had needed the humans far more than the humans had ever needed them. The records were unsealed. The full accounting of human contributions was made public. Citizens of every species learned what humanity had done for them, what humanity had suffered for them, what humanity had asked for in return and been denied. The reaction was not anger. It was not demands for the humans to return. It was shame. Deep, collective. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the humans watched the news reports and read the public statements and saw, at last, that the Council understood, but understanding had come far too late, or so everyone believed. 20 years had passed since the humans withdrew from Council space. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The Valari-Torvak War had ended only when both sides were too exhausted to fight anymore. Their once proud civilizations were shadows of what they had been. The Korathi had survived the plague, but barely. Half their population was gone. The Mithrani had lost world after world to the dread swarm. Their famous warrior spirit was broken, their armies shattered, their future uncertain. The Council still existed, but only in name. The great assembly hall was mostly empty now. The floating lights had failed years ago, never repaired. The golden walls were dull and cracked. No one had the resources or the knowledge to maintain the building that had once symbolized galactic unity. High Speaker Torum had died 5 years ago, worn down by guilt and failure. His successor was a young Valari named Sarah, who had been a child when the humans left. She had grown up in a galaxy of chaos and decline, and she led a council that had no power, no influence, no hope. On this particular day, Sarah sat alone in the assembly hall, reviewing the latest reports. The dread swarm had broken through the last defensive line. Nothing stood between them and the remaining Council worlds. In a few months, perhaps less, the swarm would reach the capital. And then, it would be over. She was not afraid. She was too tired for fear. She had spent her entire life watching the slow death of civilization. This was simply the final chapter. Then the signal came. It arrived on old frequencies, channels that had not been used in 2 decades. Human frequencies. The communication systems barely recognized the format. A face appeared on the screen. An older human man with gray hair and kind eyes. Sarah did not know him, but the records identified him immediately. Jake Carter. The last human ambassador. The one who had announced the withdrawal 20 years ago. This is Ambassador Jake Carter of the Human Federation, he said. We request permission to enter Council space. Sarah stared at the screen. She did not believe what she was seeing. Ambassador Carter, she managed to say. You're alive. I am, he replied. Many of us are. We've been watching from afar. We've seen what happened to the galaxy after we left. Why are you here? To witness the end. Jake shook his head slowly. No. We're here because the Dread Swarm has broken through your last defenses. In 6 weeks, they will reach the first populated worlds. In 3 months, they will consume everything that remains of Council civilization. We know, Sira said quietly. We cannot stop them. We have nothing left. We know that too. Jake paused, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked like pain. We've debated for years whether to come back. Many of our people said no. They said the Council deserved whatever fate awaited them. They said we had given enough. Fiver, Sarah nodded. She could not argue. The Council had earned no mercy. But we are not here because you deserve our help, Jake continued. We are here because of who we are. Because 20 years ago, we left to prove that we were more than servants. More than tools. And if we let you die now, if we stand by and watch, when we have the power to help, then we become exactly what you always believed we were. Cold, selfish, primitive. He leaned forward. We are none of those things. We never were. Behind him, the view expanded to show what lay beyond his ship. Sira's breath caught in her throat. Ships. Thousands of ships. More ships than she had ever seen in one place. A fleet that dwarfed anything the Council had possessed even in its greatest days. But these were not the simple vessels the humans had once operated. These were advanced warships, sleek and powerful, built with technology that made Council designs look like ancient relics. In our exile, we did not stop growing, Jake explained. We did not stop learning. We did not stop building. We created a new civilization, free from the limitations others had placed on us. And we built this fleet, not for conquest, but because we knew that someday, somehow, someone would need our help. Admiral Maya Brooks appeared beside him. Older now, but still strong. Chief Engineer David Park was there too, along with dozens of other humans Sira recognized from the old records. The doctors and engineers and soldiers who had once served the Council without recognition. We are offering our assistance in the fight against the Dread Swarm, Maya said. Our fleet, our soldiers, our technology. We will stand beside you, not because we owe you anything, but because this is what humans do. We help. We protect. We care about living beings, even when those beings have treated us badly. Sira felt tears forming in her eyes. She had never expected this. She had expected the humans to watch the Council burn and feel nothing but satisfaction. Why? She whispered. After everything we did to you, after all the suffering, why would you save us? Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was soft, but steady. Because someone has to. Because kindness is not a transaction. Because revenge would make us less than we are. Because the measure of a civilization is not how it treats those who help it, but how it treats those who have hurt it. He smiled, and there was no anger in his expression. Only a deep, tired compassion. We are not saviors. We are not gods. We are simply human. And being human means carrying the weight of your own heart, even when it's heavy. Even when it would be easier to let go. The fleet moved into position around the Council capital. Human soldiers began landing on the planet's surface, setting up defenses, organizing evacuations, preparing for the battle to come. Dr. Marcus Lee returned to the Karathi homeworld with a team of medical specialists. They brought new treatments, new vaccines, new hope for a species that had given up on hope. Lieutenant Commander Alex Rivera led his tactical teams back to the Mithrani border. He found his old colleagues, the warriors who had once taken credit for his victories, broken and defeated. He did not remind them of their arrogance. He simply began to plan. Across the galaxy, humans returned to the posts they had abandoned 20 years ago. They fixed the navigation beacons. They repaired the power grids. They staffed the medical stations. They did all the jobs no one else wanted to do, just as they had always done. But this time, everything was different. The council species watched them work, and they did not take it for granted. They watched humans risk their lives to save strangers, and they felt shame for the centuries of disrespect. They watched human doctors treat patients who had once called them primitive, and they understood, finally, what they had lost. The battle against the dread swarm was long and terrible. Many died, human and alien alike. But the swarm was stopped. The council was saved. The galaxy would survive. When the war ended, Ambassador Jake Carter stood before the assembled delegates for the first time in 20 years. He was old now, tired in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion. But his eyes were still kind. "This is not a new beginning," he said. "The past cannot be erased. The pain cannot be forgotten. But perhaps this can be something else. Perhaps this can be a chance to build something better. Not for us, but for those who come after." He looked around the hall at the faces of beings who had once dismissed him without a second thought. "We are all flawed. We all make mistakes. We all fail to see the value in others. But we can also change. We can learn. We can grow. That is the gift of being alive." He stepped back from the platform. "We came back because that is who we are. Now the question is, who will you choose to be?" The council had no answer yet. But for the first time in a very long time, they were willing to try to find one. And humanity, as always, would be there to help.